Hi, everyone. Welcome to this 10th episode of The Lockdown, where I explore talent in lockdown. And I have to say, due to popular request, we're back after a short break. The request meant that not enough people have asked me to stop. So we are continuing, even though in a lot of places, including New York, where my speaker and guest is today, lockdown restrictions have more than eased up. So let me introduce today's guest, which is Erica Dhawan. She is a CEO, founder, consultant, keynote speaker, author, and really wears so many hats that I just basically, at the end, post her website and you can find out more about her. But how are you today, Erica?
I am doing great, and it's great to be here to talk to you, Tomas.
Likewise, likewise. In normal circumstances, we would have done it in person. I feel we're almost there. But part of the idea when I started doing this as a kind of my own lockdown hobby was to really find out about people's experiences in these unprecedented times. And now that we're kind of transitioning from the new not normal to some form of normalcy. My first question to you, Erica, is what has been your lockdown experience like? What have you learned about yourself and maybe about the general state of humanity during these past 3 or 4 months?
Yeah, I had my second child on February 6th, 5 weeks before New York City shut down, where I had my child. And so I ended up with my family leaving New York City, being displaced, going to Pennsylvania for a few months first. And in many ways, it was emotional whiplash in the face. So, when you think about having a child and dealing with those first 6 weeks, you think about, in many ways, you're quarantined already. But really navigating that and navigating a business where so much of my speaking and work is in gatherings and having that be appended really did a few things for me. The first thing it did is it caused me to realign my priorities and focus on what I can control versus what I can't control, and to actually be more grateful for what I have. A healthy family, thank God during this time, a place to go when New York City was a really scary place. And a loving community. And sometimes these moments of lockdown really help us realize what we can control. The second thing I realized is that community and connection can really be built no matter the distance. And once I talk a little bit about my work, I've always been an advocate, truly an activist for how we create norms to enable digital collaboration and communication. But I am really excited about the transformation we're seeing from many old behaviors to digital collaboration tools becoming norms for businesses, for innovation, for social connection and celebration, for families to do it, but organizations to do it as well. And the immense opportunity we can have to really use this period of change to rapidly evolve behaviors that were often ignored or perhaps not as important in the past. So I am learning as I go. I'm focusing on what I can control, and I'm trying to focus on what I'm grateful for about this time of change in my personal life, but also in my professional life as a consultant and advisor to many leaders and organizations.
And so what has been your take or your perspective on how leaders, organizations, and really people, the average human, has coped with this huge external kind of crisis and stressors? I mean, are you positive about humanity's resilience and stuff like that, or have reactions disappointed you in general? What is your take?
I would actually say that the gaps that existed pre-COVID and the positive aspects of humanity that existed pre-COVID, both of them, sort of the negative and the positive, have been amplified in a world of full remote working, in a pandemic. And so areas where there was, or communities or bad behaviors in organizations that were negative are coming out even more glaringly obvious in an online world, in a world where we're running Zoom meetings. You can see where there's psychological safety and where there's not. And then, really great behaviors, teams and groups that had really focused on the ideas of inclusion, of productivity, of engaging, no matter the distance, are thriving even more during this crisis. And I think that goes down to, if there was trust pre-COVID, there was a willingness to work and adapt. And if there wasn't trust, it's pretty obvious and more glaringly obvious now. So I guess my answer to your question is, I am hopeful, but I'm hopeful for those that have been able to thrive through this to role model, but those that are really struggling, because I think there's both, are able to really use this moment as a catalyst to evolve from old behaviors into better ones.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk about, in many ways, you work in a range of very interesting and big areas, but I think if anything, the crisis has made them even bigger, right? So if we think that you've done so much work around D&I, then collaboration, then virtual collaboration, and now your next book, which is coming out next year, on digital body language and building trust in a virtual world. I mean, it's almost like you have predicted the state of affairs and what would happen in the world. So where should we start? Which of these should we discuss first? I'm fascinated by all of them. And, should we start with collaboration, maybe, which is your previous book?
Yeah,
talk to us about this idea of collective intelligence. What is it? Why do you see this force as an underleveraged kind of strength that organizations have?
Yeah, so 10 years ago, when I was a researcher at Harvard Center for Public Leadership, while many executives, thought leaders, authors were talking about topics like millennials and technology, what I really saw that was changing was we had to ask ourselves the question of, how do we lead effectively in a true 21st century workplace? A workplace that is going to be virtual, global, remote, multi-generational, matrixed. And we can't just rely on old school behaviors around that. And what I identified was, we need to move beyond IQ and emotional intelligence, which really require being able to read the emotions of others. And I recognize that the teams that were really able to get big things done as we evolved in the world of the digital age versus the teams that didn't had a specific skill that I called connectional intelligence. So if you think about what emotional intelligence was in the 90s, think of connectional intelligence as that new critical skill of how we truly unlock new and unrealized value by fully harnessing the power of our networks and relationships. And why is this important? It's because our world is not just connected, we are over-connected. We are inundated with meetings, with emails. But at the same time, our organization's talent feels like they're inundated in reply alls, in an inefficiency in breaking silos, in doing lots of duplicative work. So my question that I really posed in my first book, Get Big Things Done, was, how do we not connect more? How do we connect intelligently in this time? And my research really showed that we have to think differently about the intelligence of our connections and really ask ourselves questions about who, how, and in what ways we can include others. And much of that can be harnessed through the power of digital connection and is happening now.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this. I mean, are people who over reply to all when they shouldn't displaying signs of low connectional intelligence? Can they be trained to understand sometimes the point is not to reply to all?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a very practical example.
Is it possible? Is there hope for humanity?
Yeah, I mean, it's a practical example of what I would call the emotional waste, even when we have good intentions, but we're not connecting intelligently. And it is not a trivial thing. As we all know, in our remote working world right now, the amount of hours we're spending on screens, the amount of time people are scheduling meetings that should be email, scheduling, using email when it really should be a sensitive, complex conversation in a meeting, has gone to a different level. And the reality is while we know roughly 75% of our communication are those body cues, and now 100% of our communication is virtual, and research shows that even in video calls, most of the time we cannot read body language of another person because we're either looking at our face on the screen or the screen freezes. We don't see eye contact, handshakes, leaning in. And so we have to learn really a new skill around how we connect intelligently right now. And a lot of that is, the fact that reading messages carefully is the new art of listening. Writing clearly is the new art of empathy. And we've relied so much on that face-to-face communication, but this is really, my hope is a new field that is emerging, but going to become even more important for leaders now in this time.
So I remember when we co-presented in an event, I think in the Guggenheim, that you were giving really good examples, simple examples that could make managers more aware of either the signals that people send when they are using email. Now I assume that everyone is talking about, having Zoom fatigue and being Zoom-based, and even people who were good managers are thrown into this new world. I mean, can you give us some examples of, where there are either mistakes or things that managers might not be aware of that they should become more aware of and correct, right? Of like, would you call it digital etiquette or virtual etiquette to improve that?
Yeah, I would just call it connectional intelligence in our modern age, because these are just as important even when we go back to the office face-to-face as they will be online. So I have 3 tips for managers. The first is brevity can create a lot of confusion. The pressure to communicate quickly can cause us to leave out context, to take shortcuts. And we have to make sure we're not confusing a brief message with a clear message. I'll give you an example. A leader of a team I work with decided that she had an idea, and she sent a no subject calendar invitation to one of the colleagues that worked for her for a meeting at Friday at 8 a.m. And this was during this time of COVID. And when she got onto the meeting with him, she wanted to talk about a project he was working on. He thought he was about to get fired, and he didn't sleep all night, and he was exhausted. And if you think about that story, it may seem astronomical, but it's not right now. We have to really lead with what I'll call maniacal clarity. People can't read our minds, and that's why in many ways written communication and how we speak about ideas needs to be really much more thoughtful, and I believe will make us better when we go back to offices, when we come back in person. So the first one is really don't confuse clarity with brevity. The second one is to do what I call have a hold your horses mindset, which means that less haste equals more speed right now. We have to create a culture where we're prioritizing thoughtfulness instead of the person who responds quickest to an email. And, I have in my book on digital body language, which is coming out next year, I have what I call the anxiety to response time curve. If we don't receive a response from someone else, whether it's a colleague, a customer, a client, you name it, at first we're wondering why, then we might be ruminating, then we might be reading into the last conversation for clues of why they're not responding, and then we might finally assume they forgot and follow up. And a lot of that anxiety is happening, and that is unnecessary. So even simple things like create response time expectations with your team. I like to use acronyms. Some of my favorites are 4D, which means I need this in 4 days, or 2H, which means I need this in 2 hours. Even simple things like that can create a culture of confidence and clarity. Simple practices around letting your team know when to inform other individuals and having a conversation around when should we bring in other colleagues and when not to can be very beneficial right now, especially in the world of reply alls and inviting 30 people to a meeting that could have been 5 people. And the third key tip I want to share is to really focus on helping you think about how you can find your voice online and enable others to find voice. Now, Tomas, you're an expert in many of the areas of psychological safety and inclusion as well. And a lot of my research over the past 5 years has been around how do we build cultures of psychological safety online? And we have to understand that there are nuances that are different. For example, introverts have different preferences than extroverts in digital communication. Introverts prefer those clear agendas. They prefer questions sent in advance of a meeting, so they have time to process. If the meeting ends and they weren't able to share because there were a lot of extroverts interrupting and chiming in, that there's some type of space that is a chat room, whether it be email or Slack or others, where they can come back and share their ideas thoughtfully. They love the chat tool because instead of just asking everyone a question and seeing who's comfortable jumping in quickly, which are often those that are most senior or that have high tenure in organizations, asking everyone to actually share in the virtual chat forces us to not turn take and focus on the quality of ideas. And then moderators really asking people who have different or diverse ideas to share can create and enable an environment where everyone can speak up. Extroverts have different styles. They may be more comfortable speaking up. They want the video meetings, but you may need to really create moderation and sharing protocols. So one person isn't taking up the entire meeting. So in many ways, that's just one example. In a lot of my client workshops and in my research that I share a lot in my newsletters and videos, what we're seeing is a lot of the digital communication differences are also similar to what we saw face-to-face with gender differences and generational differences and cultural differences and introvert-extrovert differences. But they're becoming glaringly more obvious, and we have to be more attuned to them.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that, which basically connects us with diversity, right? So on the one hand, you're saying there are these elements of etiquette that people should be aware of, and it's almost like a typology to translate, certain behaviors into certain meanings. And of course, people use digital interactions to showcase power, dynamics, etc. On the other hand, I think what you're suggesting is that really managers and leaders need to personalize and manage for diversity, understanding what people's preferences are. Right. So talk to me a little bit about, the fine balance between, on the one hand, now checking in on your team and your employees to ensure that they're fine, but also staying out of their personal business. Right. So I'm thinking about the manager who sort of puts pressure on their team to put the camera on. Maybe they didn't want, but they're the only person who didn't. Maybe the person who is talking to their team and manager and has somebody walking in the background. And, I think some research does suggest that if you blur your background and put a fake background, already it kind of counts like people trust you less because it seems like you're hiding something, right? Like the restaurants in New York, when they don't have a letter, it's better to have a C and like a messy background, with artwork that isn't very polished than to not show anything. What do you think are kind of the new issues that people need to contemplate? And maybe this is a good segue also to your new book, which will explore these digital forms of communication in more depth as well.
Yeah, so I think that my answer to this question may have been different 2 months ago or even 3 months ago versus now. So 3 months ago, we were just, radically, quickly adapting to a massive shift and change, where many leaders thought, okay, we'll be doing this remote work thing for about 2 or 3 months max, and then we're going to get back to the office by the summertime. And so, check-ins, one-on-one, how are yous, creating safe space to talk about some of the issues in the news was incredibly important and continues to be. But now we're in a phase where we're more than 4 months in, and while we need to create environments for people to reflect and to check in on them, we also as leaders know that the work still has to get done. And so we're facing a new level of challenge now to really focus on how do we keep our teams motivated and engaged in the work, but also be empathetic to the fact that we are navigating this pandemic. I have a few recommendations here. The first is I have 3 key recommendations. The first is what I call value your team visibly in whatever way that means for you. So, it could be a practice or a norm that is not a one-off. I'm going to call people after some crazy thing happened in the news headlines, but I'm going to create a regular practice on our team that allows me to value them visibly. It could be shout outs I send at the end of every week to thank my team. It could be making sure I'm giving credit where it's due to my senior executives of what my team's been doing. It could be something fun like MVPs of the week, or whatever it might be. And it could be just as simple as valuing their time more thoughtfully. I think that a lot of the new art of respect right now is valuing people's time, starting meetings on time, ending them on time, having clear agendas, ending 5 minutes early to give them that mental health break. That itself is giving people the space to do the work that they need, but also to feel respected and acknowledged when there's a lot of other things going on. So that's the first one, valuing others visibly. The second is really just communicating clearly as a leader, and not making those careless mistakes. I'll give you an example, and this is something that one of my clients did and acknowledged. So when I sent him a text to schedule a meeting and I asked, do you want to speak Wednesday or Thursday? His response was yes. And while that's a trivial example, at the end of the day, reading carefully, not wasting people's time, writing clearly, these are really important right now. Think before you type, choose the right channel. Don't use 3 different digital communication outlets. Have rules with your team around when you Slack versus when you email, and it could save people a lot of time. And then the third is collaborate confidently. And what that really means is create a culture within your team where people feel like they know that deadlines are really deadlines, that you can prioritize thoughtfulness, and there's not a culture of chronic cancellations. And so, if you tell your team, I need this done by Friday, but then you force them to rework a document for 2 more months without breaking down what you actually meant at the beginning, it can create a lot of lack of motivation, and it can make people feel like you're not being empathetic. And a lot of empathy right now is being thoughtful about what you need from them, and actually that is motivating to them at the same time, because it allows them to see value. Or one of my favorites is, you say you need something by, the next morning at 10 a.m., but then you don't look at it for a week and a half when someone rushes to do something. So in some ways, I would actually say a lot of the leadership behaviors that sometimes we ignored, but that we needed to improve pre-COVID are coming to bear more, and that are actually the keys to showing empathy and respect to our teams and keeping them motivated and getting the work done.
And presumably you have to engage in these behaviors if you want to create a climate of inclusion in your teams and your organization, right? As leader, talk to me as somebody who has given keynotes on D&I or DE&I now for some time. What is your sense of whether the field is making progress, evolving? What do you see in executives when you deliver the message, and how are we advancing here? Are we tracking progress? What is your sense?
Yeah, I would say I've been in the field of inclusion for 10 years now. And, what I've found is that there's been many times where there is sort of a knee-jerk reaction to something that happens in the media or in the world. And it causes, and really in an important way, up-levels the conversation around diversity and inclusion, around right now, anti-racism, equality, belonging. But I think one of the most important things that we have to do is really ask ourselves, and I would say I'm working on this. I'm not going to say that I feel like the organizations that I've worked with as clients have struggled with it becoming, sort of a flashy item, the importance of inclusion, and throwing a lot of events at it, or speaking engagements or conferences, but not really instilling the behaviors in a sustained way with accountability to leaders. And so, I would say I'm really hopeful about the conversation right now around inclusion and diversity. But I am carefully conscious and concerned that if we don't focus on the true accountability and that, where we put our money, how we hire, what the results really look like, this could become just a flashy item with a lot of great events versus a true cultural change that transforms businesses, organizations, and true outcomes.
Have you seen, or can you think of, good examples or where you see organizations that are taking it very seriously, that they are kind of using, data to diagnose issues, measure whether it's inclusive? I know that you did a lot of work even around social network analysis to see whether people were included or not in collaborative efforts, communications. Who would you say are examples of, look, this is really like a good case study that others should emulate, if you can think of any good examples?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, so there are examples of one-off initiatives that I think have been really exciting. There was a company I worked with to really look at inclusion, not just from a race or gender or generational perspective of how many people are on teams, for example, but where we actually quantified what does inclusion look like in meetings, in phone calls, in emails, where a lot of the true communication happens. That's really the difference between a diversity ranking score and inclusion. And what we actually developed was a set of inclusion scores that really helped leaders understand and check their own unconscious biases around, if they look at their team members and they look at, certain peer groups, who are they including versus not including? And some of that's
you organize kind of zincs or drinks on Zoom, and there's a couple of people who, for religious reasons, don't drink, and then you don't realize, and you're asking people, what's your favorite cocktail? What are you having, right? So that'll be an example, right. Simple example.
So
right?
So one part is like who's actually even invited to the meeting, and the other part is our language. There's a great company, Text.io, that I really like that focuses on inclusive language in recruiting. And even in my own research on digital body language, I've checked my own biases. I would start emails with, "Hey guys," and starting an email with "Hey guys" is not very inclusive. And I'm learning myself about some of the behaviors that I can continually improve. And I think what excites me is that we still focus on the numbers, in terms of head count, but we also really focus on the true behaviors that make up, I would call, the real oxygen of the culture of inclusion versus exclusion.
Do you feel that as younger generations enter the leadership ranks and almost the executive ranks, there will be an organic kind of culture change or improvement in terms of becoming less hierarchical, a little bit more, I don't know if empathetic is the word, but maybe more inclusive or less hierarchical, or is it just a myth?
I would say that what I've found in my work that really has spanned different generations is that I do believe that there will be more of a comfort with digital collaboration. I think especially millennials and Gen Z that grew up with AOL Instant Messenger, and our research studies have shown they're just as comfortable in a Slack or email message as they are on the phone. They're not people that say, I only have to be on the phone. Some of them love it, of course, but are going to help evolve digital collaboration to a new level, which will break down hierarchies and allow more people to be included and create more open lines of conversation. However, I do not, I am carefully concerned that we still need to elevate the behaviors of really emotional intelligence and the understanding of inclusion at younger ages versus older ages. And I'm actually what you'd call a geriatric millennial. I'm on the edge. And many people have said to me, oh, your generation will change this. And I believe that's not right. I believe it's the cross exchange that has to happen that is going to allow for true exchange. Otherwise, the younger generation is going to make the same mistakes. Back in 2012, believe it or not, while I was at Harvard, I did a study on, and I wrote an HBR piece if you want to check it out online. And the study was all about how does Gen Y believe about gender? What does Gen Y think about gender norms, and especially the work-life balance dynamics? And my study, which I shared in that article, actually shows that there wasn't actually a difference between men and women across generations. There were still some typical biases that emerged. And so we all know, this is an Ann Weisberg quote, we can't change the environment at work when it comes to gender norms if we don't change them at home. And that is a century-long challenge. And so I don't think it's going to be solved in a generation. I think it's going to be solved through continuous engagement and learning across generations.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we will post that article, also the one we co-wrote on how to collaborate more effectively when your team is remote or virtual, which, you know, was pre-pandemic, but has done pretty well thanks to the crisis, and keeps going up to the top 10 of HBR. So I'll share that link as well. And, you know, we are coming to an end. I'm conscious now that I have to finish 5 minutes before the official end time so that I can give you freedom and respect, which you nudged me to do. I do want to talk a little bit about how you see the short-term future kind of unfolding. You know, what will happen to this kind of a huge beast called the world of work and careers or talents, and what is your hope that should happen? You know, if crisis really means a new normal that represents some sense of evolution from where we were before. What do you think should go away? What needs to come back? For example, now there's so much discussion, not only or not anymore on working from home, whether it makes people more productive or less productive, but whether we need an office, whether the office should be extinguished altogether or not. So what is your hope, and what do you think will happen if you're brave enough to venture any predictions?
Yeah. So, you know, I would say my hope is that traditional workplaces become more like the model of creating films. So, you know, when films are created, when movies are developed, what they do is they don't have a traditional office and lots of headcount. They bring the best experts from different environments, the designer, the film producer, the screenwriter, the actor, the actresses, and they all come together for meaningful projects and work, and then they disperse again. And one of the things that I would hope from this crisis is that we have much more comfort with, first of all, virtual working. And in many ways, that will be the great equalizer, because global teams who are not in headquarters are going to feel just as included. Those that work remotely can feel included. Those that aren't going to be blocked by traditional unconscious biases in a room because they have a stutter or that they're shorter, and won't really struggle with that in the world of emails and phone calls and video meetings, where a lot of those biases aren't as conscious, will be able to thrive in their contributions. And that will create flatter hierarchies and allow us to break silos and allow organizations to leverage the intelligence and really the collective capital of all of their employees, not just for specific roles, but across the organization. That is my hope. At the same time, what I think we need to really be carefully considering is how will we do that in a way where we can upskill individuals that I'll call digital adapters, those that feel like working in a remote environment is like learning a new language, where they're immigrants to it, and that are struggling, and create environments for vulnerability where there can be that cross-cultural exchange, where people will not just feel sidelined, but will be involved in ways that they can really contribute. And so to summarize that, I would hope that, you know, organizations can film lots of movies in different ways and really harness the power of cross-pollination and collective intelligence, but at the same time, not sideline individuals and bring out the best of individuals, leveraging all of our digital connections.
So that is a pretty optimistic and you know, positive outlook. Are you a natural optimist, or do you think this is a case of data-driven optimism?
I am an optimist, but I would also say that while I am an optimist, I try to be realistic, and I think the realism coming in is the fact that I am concerned that things won't change for industries that are perhaps booming right now, where they don't feel a need to actually change bad behaviors. And those that are really struggling, that may actually be forced to evolve behaviors that weren't working in the past. And so my hope is that we can all really come together and use these forces for good. And I'm optimistic, but I also am a realist that if they don't, we really have to hold and create space for those that feel displaced or lonely or are out of work in this time.
Erica, thank you so much. Where can people find out more about your work? And if they want to find out more about themselves, do you have any tools, anything that you can flag up where they can, evaluate themselves, their potential? Where can they find more?
Yeah, well, you can find me on my website at ericadhawan.com. I have a free report on the site that you can download that will allow you to assess yourself on connectional intelligence. And it's a 10-minute assessment that will give you an inside view on your own style of connecting and some best practices, especially in this time of digital work. I also have a toolkit focused on my newest research on digital body language. And if you go on my website to ericadhawan.com/DBL-toolkit, you'll get access to a set of materials that can help you create a set of collaboration norms on your team to more effectively build trust, connection, and inclusion, no matter the distance. So definitely check those out and find me on LinkedIn.
Great. And finally, let's repeat the name, or say it properly, because I just went over it very quickly, of your last book and the one that's coming out next year.
Yeah, my last book is called Get Big Things Done, The Power of Connectional Intelligence. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. And my new book coming out next spring, follow me or download my report to get more insight on that, is called Digital Body Language. And it will share the new rules of trust in a virtual age.
Erica, thank you. Great pleasure. As always, stay well.
Thank you.